now, so good gossip. One conversation open up understanding and empowerment.
Yeah. Hey, yo, get 20 years up, oh. Black woman empowerment. Corporate renaissance for women of color. Reclaiming power in the workplace. Black women. Sponsored by Veteran Sex Designs. Create a better and still
Hey y'all, it's Bernice Nash, your host of Good Gossip. I'm so happy to be back. Such a unique season of my life, and the best part of it is I'm getting to meet new people. Today we have Dr. Ciera Graham-Graves. So excited. Read her article about almost 2 years ago, was completely inspired by it, and wanted to bring her on to talk to y'all because her journey through learning and understanding what women of color go through in the workforce has also kind of navigated into my own journey as I move into this next chapter of who I am and who I'm becoming. Dr. Ciera Graham-Graves, thank you so much for joining us. If you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thank you. So happy to be here. So a little bit about me. So I have about 10 years of experience as a career coach, primarily helping college students, entry employees, mid-level employees kind of navigate workplace challenges, navigate career shifts, also helping with resume, cover letter development, how to sell yourself, how to be marketable, as well as salary negotiation. Started a business in 2020, like many entrepreneurs during kind of the COVID period. We were really looking for an opportunity to explore our identity outside of our, full-time job. And so I started Dr. C. Graham Consulting, a career coaching company, and I'm also a freelance writer on the side. A lot of the writing that I do is really, in parallel and aligns to the career coaching. So my writing is really focused on the challenges of women of color in the workplace, the challenges of millennials, Gen Z, as well as entry to mid-level employees. So that's what I do as a side hustle. And then a full-time job, I've been an educator working in higher education. I have about 15 years of experience in higher education administration.
Wow, such a huge resume.
Thank you.
Amazing. Here's what I'll say, and you and I kind of traded notes about this. I see so many times that us as women of color, we're overachievers. That's what I'm going to call it.
Yes.
We want to learn so much. We want to do so much, and it's all good stuff and it's all beneficial. I just, when I think about kind of how do you unify the efforts of all these degrees and all these businesses, that's kind of my next step in my own personal journey.
Sure.
How do we integrate that? I feel like that's the way you change things.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely.
And your article on hypervisibility is how I was first introduced to you. I read that article and it was like you knew me. It was creepy. I was like, wait a minute, somebody's filming my life.
Yes.
And it's so interesting. I had shared that article on my LinkedIn. First of all, when you share pieces like that, people are so squeamish. Even people that are experiencing it, and it's really scary. But there was one gentleman that I know, and he's endearing. He's actually from London, and he liked the post, and he's like, "It's so true." And I'm like, thank you, somebody that is not me, that does not look like me, and
Yes.
that's not having the experiences that I'm having, is able to look at this objectively and subjectively, really, and say, you know what, there is an issue. And so you writing pieces like this is creating such a level of transparency for other people of color to say, you know what, I'm not imagining this. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This was actually one of the first articles that I wrote, Bernice, in my journey of kind of freelance writing. And, there was something deeply personal about this because this was reflective of my own experience, being a Black female in a predominantly white workplace, being a Black female who had went to predominantly white schools. And so you put things out there into the universe and you never know if people are going to read it, how it's going to resonate. And so I just want to say I'm inspired that the piece had such an impact on you as well. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
I want to talk a little bit, really kind of get into the nuts and bolts of things. And of course, me reading several of your articles and also just following you on social media because I have to know who this lady is because she's amazing, right?
Yes.
Have a host of questions for you. And first, really, I want to know what we kind of know what caused you to write this, which is really that awareness piece.
Yes.
But is there a particular situation or
Yeah.
something that caused you to really say, you know what, I have to voice this?
Yeah, yeah. So for all of your listeners, the article, its full title was Hyper Visible Invisible, How to Navigate White Workplaces as a Black Woman. And this was an article, again, the first article that I had ever written, and it was published by Career Contessa. It's a career platform for women. It's not exclusive to women of color. So really appreciate Career Contessa providing the space and the opportunity for me to elevate my own experiences and the experiences of other Black women. So as I mentioned before, I have spent most of my childhood and really young adult life in predominantly white schooling and predominantly white workplaces. And so I'm thinking back to a picture that I often look back on. It's actually a picture of me when I was in preschool. And there were about 8 kids in the photo, so a very small class, and I was the only Black child. And then, I went on to predominantly white colleges, and that's really sort of been a theme in my life. And I know that's also been a theme for, many other Black women. Growing up though, my Blackness was always on display. My womanness was always on display. I'm thinking back to like when I was in school, probably middle or high school, being told to kind of like tone down how I maybe speak certain words, whether that's, we call it kind of Ebonics or like, Black English, or needing to like dress, in a way where I don't bring attention or, accentuate my curves. And I think this is sort of this duality that a lot of Black women experience, this, this notion of being very, very hyper visible. You're seen, you're too visible, but also being told that your presence and your experience doesn't matter. And so we're constantly, navigating this sense of being both hyper visible and invisible. I couldn't be too outspoken, but I also couldn't be like too quiet. So it was a very, very hard experience to kind of navigate. And I think this, like I mentioned, I think it mirrors a lot of experiences that Black women have in the world. And so for me, the writing was therapeutic. I feel like any freelance writer who is speaking to their own experience and wanting to connect that to others is a very powerful therapeutic experience because you're connecting the threads of your own life to the lives of others. And I think there's just something cathartic and therapeutic that happens as a result of that.
Absolutely. I'm going to pick up a few of the pieces that you dropped there. For instance, I'd say maybe in the last 10 years, I noticed how much I code switch. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
And what I did is I examined it amongst my husband and I was like, does he do that? No. If you pay attention, Black women are the only people that have to code switch. When we're parenting, for instance, with me, when I'm parenting my children, I'm a Black woman. When I'm at work, I'm an American woman.
Absolutely.
And it's such a stark thing, but then in my daily life, that walk, once I've proven myself, I can be respected as an American woman. But when I show up initially, I'm judged as a Black woman.
Yes.
It's a super extremist way of living. So we're kind of I'm going to call it, we're in a bipolar social situation.
Yes.
That's what I'll call it.
Yes. Absolutely.
And looking at your article and just the nuances behind it and thinking about all these things that heighten post-pandemic, can you talk a little bit about kind of has it gotten worse? Is it better? What do you think?
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the experiences of, I think, Black people in general during the pandemic, and then I'll talk a little bit more about post-pandemic because I think the pandemic experiences were very unique and at least in my generation, was an experience that we had not yet. So, during the pandemic, we were navigating issues of police brutality, from the untimely and unfortunate murders of Breonna Taylor and George George Floyd. We also saw the development of sort of the Black Lives Matter movement. And we were also navigating a pandemic, COVID, that was really killing our people at alarming rates. Most of our people, Black people, found themselves out of work due to cuts to the social service sector, and also the closure of non-essential businesses. So I think, 2020 and really beyond was just a pivotal time. I think we saw the impact of racism and economic injustice sort of collide. This was the first time, frankly, that I've seen America confront racism and police brutality in ways that was aggressive and palpable. And I think social media really helped out a lot with that because it became more visible. People had greater and more just faster access to what was happening and going on in the world. Many of us at the time were also working in, corporate jobs or office jobs where, you had to work from home due to concerns around safety. And many people of color during this time had talked about how working from home really shielded them from the everyday racism and microaggressions that they felt in the workplace. Being remote kind of offered this sense of protection that we didn't necessarily get when we were in person. And I think that disconnection that we all experience from being away from the office was really therapeutic for a lot of us. I think post-pandemic, and I'm sort of saying that is now, things have really changed. I think we're just in a very difficult climate right now. We are realizing that this administration is committed to the complete erasure and really stigmatization of DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. We've seen the whitewashing of DEI. We've seen a complete erasure of combos about racism and gender discrimination in the workplace, which I think makes it really hard to notice where the problems are, where the challenges are. We're not able to see that people are experiencing our society differently. And I think that's challenging for a lot of us who are experiencing challenges in the workplace. We don't necessarily have access to safety nets that we once had. There's a lot of workplaces that are getting rid of affinity groups. You may have worked for a company that had a group for Black professionals in a given field where you can go and seek respite and meet new people. And a lot of companies are getting rid of those initiatives. And so it's become really challenging because we are now left to not recognize the differences that exist in the workplace and really suppress a lot of our own experiences that we're having.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You brought up some really interesting points. And here's what I'll say. I remember working for a company that was publicly traded. And I will say this and be very sincere about it. Most of the companies that really paid attention to that outcry for appreciation for those of differences were those that are publicly traded because they had people watching them. Those that were not, it was a whole different story.
Yeah.
But I did work for one, and they did have, like you said, the affinity groups. And I remember being a part of the African American group. And I was also a part of the LGBTQ group as well. I support everybody. I feel like,
Absolutely.
I think so many people, they're all about themselves and unconcerned about everyone else. I believe that the scale should be balanced for everybody. It's your thing. It's your thing. As long as you're not hurting anybody, that's your thing. You should be able to do it. So with that being said, I still remember advocating for a sickle cell society. This is when I lived in Chicago, and going to the board saying, hey, we want to donate some money to the Sickle Cell Society, and them coming back and saying, well, that's really only for one group of people, and we want to make sure when we donate it's for everyone. And I'm like, there's always a nuance, and really, Black people are not the only people that get sickle cell. So I had to do a lot of research and really just campaign, but that's part of the strife of, you're telling me I'm important, but then you're minimizing my importance based on your bottom line or your tolerance for who I am. And here's a bigger holistic picture, and this is just something I've examined on my own, is that if you walk this walk at work and you walk another walk at home, what's the point? Because work and home intertwine all the time.
Absolutely.
I tell people that.
Yes.
I believe to work with somebody is really to be an extension of their family. And if I'm the family that's only invited to the secret cookout that, it's just you and I, then we're not really family.
Absolutely.
So that's an interesting nuance. I appreciate you breaking that down.
Yeah.
With this heightened, I guess, level of being post-pandemic, so everybody's super aware of what's going on, but super aware hasn't created equity. Actually, like you mentioned, it's being rolled back very interestingly.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not paying attention, you may not see that segregation is almost the looming threat. But with all that being said, why do you think that Black women seem to be stuck in this unhealthy work cycle? I feel like it's more perpetuated towards us.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is. Black women, I think, bear the brunt of a lot of systemic injustices and unfair policies in the workplace. I will say, though, I have been doing some recent internal work. And when I say internal work, I mean therapy around my own self-exploration around my relationship to work, which I think every Black female really needs to it's something that we need to really work on. And so I've really been looking at how work is connected to my own feelings of anxiety and depression. I, like many Black women, I think how we work and approach work is deeply connected to lessons that we received in our own childhood. For instance, many of us were told, you have to work twice as hard to get, half as far. I'm sure, that is a lesson that many of us recognize. I'm also the oldest in my family, the oldest daughter, which I think is a very unique experience in itself. So I naturally had to take on the role of a caregiver for siblings and also now aging parents. And I think these lessons in particular are very deeply connected to Black girlhood. And it also, unfortunately, it leads us to adopt a very toxic belief, a very unhealthy beliefs around work. Working twice as hard to only get half as far leads to burnout. It leads to us constantly proving our worth in workplaces because we feel unworthy. So we're taking on more projects, we're working late, we're working on the weekends, we're ignoring our own needs for self-care. Being a caregiver and constantly being socialized around the need to care for other people, it often leads us to be the person in the workplace who needs to clean up other people's messes. I don't know how many of your listeners can resonate with that, but I've been there. It often leads us to engage in care work in the workplace. And so what I mean by that is, how many of us have volunteered to do the party planning? Or do the morale building or plan the team retreats. That's all care work, which is all great. I'm not minimizing the importance of that work, but a lot of that work tends to fall on women of color, specifically Black women. And none of this work, this care work in the workplace is really promotable. And it doesn't really lead to advancement, unfortunately. And I think there's been a lot of research done around how women of color in particular are often more saddled with the care work in the workplace. And so as part of my own personal journey, I've been really confronting these beliefs about work and how we were raised. Our childhood has really shaped how we approach work. And I think it's really led me to say, I cannot blame myself in this situation or feel guilty about some of the choices that I make around work. And it's led me to really find that the reason is external and not internal. So it's really led to kind of less shaming and less kind of victim blaming.
You brought up so many important nuggets, and it's so interesting. When I decided to leave corporate America, I came across this article and it said, Black women are not your mammy. And that's essentially what you just said, us always being the one that we are the sacrificial lamb, where I am giving to you. So I'm team building, I'm supporting, I'm trying to turn around something that's a mess. I'm trying to clean it up. I'm trying to fix it. I recall being young at work and, every time there was a chili cook-off or whatever, I volunteer. I'd be up late at night, trying to do something to make sure that I showed up like I cared about work,
Yeah.
And the last employer that I had, I never cooked a thing there. And I said, wow, that was like a turning point in my mental status of, I don't have to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, you do not.
And that's, like you said, that's that unpromotable piece. I love that you said that. So I'm this value add, right? It's like, okay, when you buy a new car and, they're like, oh, do you want this package or that package? Those packages cost more money, right?
Yeah.
but we're coming in and being this level of package of person, of employee, of citizen, whether that's I'm in your neighborhood and now I'm the lady you can come get cookies from, or
Mm-hmm.
you know that your children are watched out for because I'm keeping
Yeah.
an eye,
Yep.
or I'm trustworthy to, watch your mail or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting nuance. I've already seen it, but you've really
Yeah.
given me a broader perspective on that. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Yeah. You're welcome.
So, what's your advice for somebody who is in a work situation that you've mentioned in your writing?
Yeah. So, I think the last point that you brought up, Bernice, is so critical. And that's this sense of like what community care means to us as Black people, which I think is very different than like community care as sort of a tool for exploitation, which is oftentimes what happens in a lot of predominantly white workspaces. So I want to start there because I do think we are a people, we are connected to community. And I think about my own upbringing and how, playing outside was just something that we did. But, my mom knew that there were other neighbors looking out for us. There was that community of care. And there was a sense of sort of empowering other people through that community of care. And I think I've done that through my writing, is that empowerment, that connection to other experiences and empowering other people, especially Black women, to realize you are not in this by yourself. There is a sense of affinity to each other's experiences. And so I encourage other Black women to do the same within your workplace or virtually, is to really find that community of care. And I do understand, I think now it's even harder, right? Because many of us enjoy the protection of being at home and being shielded from racism and gender discrimination. Many of us are also navigating this weird sort of hybrid workplace where you're in the office sometimes, and then other times you're at home, which can also be very difficult to sort of find your community as well. And so I do want to first say, it is a common experience to feel both hypervisible and invisible. I think it's important that I sort of affirm that. And I think until we get rid of racism and gender discrimination, these experiences are still going to be very common. I just think we have to be even more careful, especially now, about how we voice our opinions about the incidences of harm in the workplace. I think finding white allies are key. In the article that we've sort of been talking about, the hypervisible, invisible article, I talk about this story. And it's, where I'm in a meeting with other coworkers, and there was a white male colleague in the meeting, and he had realized that I wanted to say something, but I wasn't able to interject because there were other white people in the room who were basically taking a lot of airtime. So he stopped the meeting and he said, Ciera, you had something to say. And I think this is just a great example of like what great white, in particular white male allyship looks like. And I was really like astonished, and internally I was like crying and screaming, why did it take him really stopping a meeting and calling me out for people to actually listen? And it was also in this moment where I think he modeled a practice that other white colleagues, I think especially white men, should really model. And sometimes it is necessary to stop a meeting and give the platform and the space to other women of color. I know that's a lot kind of embedded in that answer, but my advice is to find your community of care. It's often difficult to find that community in the workplace. And so find, other opportunities externally where you can feel a sense of empowerment. Find hobbies that you enjoy, but also find, and sometimes you do have to seek out allyship, because I have found in my experiences that white people may be less likely to really offer up or volunteer their allyship. And so sometimes it is something that you have to seek out. I think that allyship piece is very important.
You bring up a great point. I was very close to the C-suite in my last role, and I remember just being, there were definitely allies that I had that when I came into a room and it was a meeting that I'm to host, that I'm to guide, that I'm to lead and direct, there were people that didn't know me, of course. And so and they might be another white male or a white female, and there was a very adversarial position. But then that one that did know me, so that white male that he knows Bernice knows what she's doing, and let's respect Bernice's opinion. He's like, wait, Miss Bernice knows a lot about this, and like really setting the stage. And it, like you said, it felt good, but it's also insulting because it's like
Yeah.
somebody had to set the stage for you to respect me.
Yes.
I started being very intentional in my career. I didn't put my degrees on my, a lot of people put them on their cards or their email.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'm like, this is too much. Why do I need to lead with that? You need to lead with, I'm Bernice Nash and this is my job. And so if they trusted me to be here, then you need to trust that my opinion is sound. And it can be very demeaning because you can be right 1,000 times. And really, it only takes that one time out of 1,000, that 1,001 time that you're not
Mm-hmm.
right, where
Mm-hmm.
you lose all credibility that you've built in those 1,000 times of being completely correct. And then you think about what you had to do to build that. And like you said, that allyship. So you're not necessarily seeking me out as an ally. I've had to probably climb the Mount Kilimanjaro in order for
Mm-hmm.
you to say, you know what? She made it to the top of that mountain. I believe
Yeah.
right now.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, you could have somebody else that favors them and somebody that they're more comfortable with, and they believe them
Mm-hmm.
instantly. There's instant credibility.
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
you think about that, and my mind is ticking. I'm thinking about people applying for jobs. And,
Mm-hmm.
a big thing now is I've seen people put their picture on a resume, or
Mm-hmm.
everybody wants your LinkedIn. So your biases immediately click in when you click on my profile or you see my picture. When before, if you remember, you talk about what Black women have to walk around with understanding you
Yeah.
have to work twice as hard.
Yeah.
If you remember, they'd say, well, if your name was very ethnic, they're not going to pick your resume.
Right. Yeah.
So it's interesting. I think social media, I think, the availability of, you can just snap a professional photo in your bedroom,
Mm-hmm.
great. But there's
Mm-hmm.
also this whole digital upheaval, or I would
Mm-hmm.
say upholding of what's already been happening.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's such an important point you're bringing up, because there's so much impression management work that happens for people of color as they're applying for jobs. And some of the clients I work with, I've gotten the question, like, should I put, a picture on my resume? Should I include like how do I pronounce my name on my resume? And it's just, I think there's just so much additional labor that goes into how we, ensure that we're marketable. And some of that labor is also suppressing parts of our identity too, which I've always told people, if you have to suppress your identity to get in the door at a company, is this actually a company that you want to work for? And so I think there's just some deep reflection oftentimes that we need to do in the job search process as well.
Absolutely. No,
Yeah.
it's so funny when I left my corporate job and I sat back and I like started reading job descriptions, because I'm like, oh, do I
Mm-hmm.
want to work for someone else again?
Yeah.
That's what crossed my mind.
Yep. Yep.
It's
Absolutely.
it's almost like knowing you're going to get I kind of fashion it, I guess, pre desegregation. And you knowing that, it's funny, one day I sat back and I watched Good Times. Okay, I watched Good Times as a kid, but it never really meant a whole bunch to me until I got
Sure.
grown and I saw that James
Yeah.
never had a job. So
Yes.
why every episode was he unemployed? Like he had a
Mm-hmm.
job for 3 seconds. And so and so it's that same idea, is that
Yeah.
you're just going into, he was just going into battle every week, essentially. And
Mm-hmm.
so when you're, as a Black person, a person of color, you're going out there and you don't know what you're gonna get. And you're literally
Yeah.
going into battle. And like you said, there are telltale signs, but to what extent are we all showing our cards?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question.
So we've talked about a whole bunch here, and
Mm-hmm.
it's really generated a lot of deep thoughts for me. I thought I had all my deep thoughts before we started talking today, but I guess not. But to help those who are in the throes of it, and
Mm-hmm.
really those who are trying to navigate, like you said, peace. Can you talk about self-care? Discuss
Yeah.
what an exit strategy looks like when you're in a toxic workplace.
Yeah, this is such a good question. Oftentimes I work with clients to where they've been through so much in a workplace that we've gotten to the point where it's like the only option is to leave, right? And sometimes that is the best advice, but also I want to acknowledge that leaving a workplace is sometimes a privilege. You're leaving connections, you're leaving your network, you're leaving, access to social capital, you're leaving, money on the table, potentially, if it's not another job that pays more. So, for me, self-care is a journey and it's been an evolution and it has looked differently at different points in my life. So just a few tips that I really want to give, but I definitely think it still answers your question. So for me, it's identifying your non-negotiables in a workplace and make sure you do that at different points in your life, because I will say the 20-something-year-old Ciera had different non-negotiables in a workplace than the almost now 40-year-old Ciera. I think for me now, approaching the age of 40, I want to be protected from harm. I want an opportunity for connection and community. I want work-life harmony, which means that I need clear boundaries between work and life. I do not need the spillover of like, hey, Ciera, there's this project and I need you to get it done in the evening time, and potentially like sacrifice time with your spouse. I don't need that at this age. But prior to being married, I probably would have like jumped at that because I would have said, you know what, that could lead to me being promoted. I don't necessarily have the same aspirations of like being promoted at this age. Also an opportunity for growth. Growth doesn't always look like advancement, so I want to make that clear. Growth can also look like learning a new skill, doing a project that you've never had the opportunity to participate in, working with different types of people in the workplace. And then my last negotiable is just how a workplace can really ensure that I matter. And that looks differently to different people. I think for me at this age, it's a salary that allows me to enjoy my life, and then how my work connects to the overall mission. I don't ever like to do work in isolation. I need to know how what I'm producing, what I'm doing day in and day out connects to the overall company vision. And I think that's a part of self-care, is like really talk to yourself about what are some of the things that you need in a workplace right now. And I would recommend people do this every 5 years because things are going to change. I would also say, if you're at this position where you're in a very toxic workplace and leaving is the only option, start positioning yourself for employment. And I think this should also be like a reoccurring thing that you do like every couple months, because some people, they wait until they're near burnout, like they're going to the hospital, their health is suffering. And really, I had a boss tell me, this was like probably 10 years ago, and he's like, the smartest employee has 1 foot in the door and 1 foot out of the door. And what that means is you should constantly be looking for opportunities. Have 1 foot in to convey that you have just a sense of loyalty and a sense of commitment, but you should also constantly be looking. And so, that means updating your resume. Update your resume, I would probably say every month, because you're probably learning new things, you're doing new projects, you're gaining new skills. Talk to mentors, talk to them about, opportunities that exist at companies that they work for, are their company's hiring. Also seeing if you can transfer to another department. Sometimes leaving your place of work isn't always an option, but are there other opportunities that exist within another department? Working on your interview skills, identifying your references, constantly updating your references is important. Some people, they have a reference list where they have people on there that have been a reference for like 10 plus years. And that's great. Like, I think it's great to have people who you've had some type of longevity with, but don't be afraid to like update your references as well. Like, as you're meeting new people, people are learning different things about who you are, your skill set, how you work with people. Like, it's okay to take someone off your reference list who's been there for a really long time. And I think especially if you haven't worked with this person in a while, it might be good to actually have people on your reference list who can actually speak to how you are as sort of a current employee. And then the last advice I want to give is just understand where there are safe opportunities to share your experiences with HR. I think sometimes HR, human resources, tends to get a very bad rep because people often say that they may not always be there to help and support the employee. They're there for the institution or the company. But I've worked at a lot of really great places where HR has actually shown that they're there to benefit the employee. They do staff engagement surveys. They do staff climate surveys. They're constantly doing like focus groups to really understand what employees need, how to respond to those needs. And so I just think it's up to you to sort of identify where there are opportunities where I can share my experiences with HR and there isn't going to be, any type of like retaliation or, my job won't be in jeopardy. But I think that's important too. I also recommend anyone who is leaving a workplace to please do an exit interview. A lot of people, they're like, I don't know if it's really going to have a benefit. And I would say most times it doesn't, right? But I just think if you have been through a very toxic experience, having that documented with HR is so critical. When you do an exit interview, for the most part, unless you're reporting something hugely egregious, it does stay on record, with HR. And I just think that written documentation is really, really important.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What I do see, and you gave a lot of nuggets here.
Mm-hmm.
The interesting thing is what I noticed with companies, and yes, you may have pockets of safety. So you mentioned about transferring to different departments. Yeah. That's why knowing your fellow colleagues is very important so you can understand what their experiences look like.
Mm-hmm.
Also, you mentioned about the exit interview. So I'll just be honest and say, I'm trying to think, have I done an exit interview? No, because usually I was leaving a company to go somewhere else. So when you say that,
Sure.
they don't really care. My last company, I did not do a exit interview, and I feel like who I showed up as each day was my exit interview. So I didn't leave because I couldn't do the job.
Sure.
It must have been something else. And so I feel like if you knew me well enough, because I'm very transparent, I think that what happens at work, and this is the interesting part of people, is that there's this one person at work and then there's one person at home. I can't do that much memorizing. I need to be the same person in the room. I'm sorry. So if you knew me at work, you knew me at home, and you understand my story and you understand who I am, and so you know that if I made a decision, it's because I had all the facts available to me to make the right decision.
Absolutely.
So that's very interesting to me. You mentioned about kind of that, moving forward and making sure that you kind of have all your ducks in a row. And I know you do your career coaching, and I guess maybe we can talk about how you can support somebody that's looking to relaunch their career or continue on.
Yeah. So, I work with clients who are dealing with like a spectrum of issues when it comes to sort of leaving a workplace, or, they've been in a field or an industry for a while and they're like, I've enjoyed stability, but I'm really looking for something different. And that something different could be something that is just a complete change from what they've been doing industry-wise, job-wise, career-wise. And so typically for people who fit into kind of the latter box, I do a lot of like career assessments, really, looking at what are your interests, what are your skills, like let's really like articulate what are your transferable skills that you enjoy, what do you feel like your strengths are. And that's really, I think, assessment work, internal work that a lot of people just don't do naturally. And then I think with that, it's like looking at other jobs and careers that actually speak to some of those transferable skills. And so I do a lot of that exploration work with clients. I have a counseling background, and so I always want to explore deeper what are people's reasons for leaving or like wanting a career change, because I think that's critical too. Some of it is rooted in, wanting to kind of get away from this life of complacency, wanting to try something different and new. Some of it is linked to, I've been in a really toxic workplace, I need to get out of it. But I always want people to stay true to like who they are and what they do. I don't think people should just be leaving a job and going into something that doesn't like feed their soul. And so I always talk to people about how can we do this in a smart way, in an intelligent way, and in a way that still honors who you are, honors your interest, and honors, really what you enjoy doing.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's funny to me because my son, he's 17, so he's going into college this fall.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing that's racking his brain is like, who am I? Who do I want to be? I know
Yes.
what I can do.
Yes.
But what can I do forever? And I'm like, the beautiful thing is what you don't realize is it's ever evolving.
Absolutely.
And you get the framework of who you are. Some people are deep thinkers, some
Yep.
people are process focused,
Yeah.
and so I love that you say that it's essentially rebranding, right?
It is. Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Treat yourself like you're a business as well. That's why I tell
Yes.
people all the time, I'm like,
Yes.
your life is business. Who you are,
It is.
that's your brand.
It is. Yes. Yes. And I think that's such an important point. And I want to also emphasize, make sure people understand your brand.
Yeah.
That's additional work. So first you got to articulate and define what your brand is. You got to believe it, because if you don't believe it, other people won't believe it. But I think some of the best advice I think that I can give people, especially sort of young mid-level employees, is make sure people understand your brand, because that's how people buy into you. That's how people are invested in you. That's how you get people on your reference list. That's how people get jobs, is if they can understand and be able to articulate your brand. And also, they need to be able to sort of assess how your brand aligns with hiring needs of like a given company too.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's so funny. Somebody asked me that. They were like, so what are your core values? I was immediately able to say it because your core values are not the things that you do daily.
Yeah.
So it's not, I'm a reader. No.
Right.
Core values are, like for me, it's integrity, faith, and family.
Yes. Yep.
So boom. And anything that I do in life, you can immediately go to those 3 pinnacle points and say,
Yep.
who is Bernice and whether or not she will do that?
Yep.
Is it integral?
Yes.
Is it faith driven? And is it affecting my family in what way?
Yes.
So I love that. And like you said, as you get older, you kind of realize your whys and wherefores. I wanted to say something when you talked about being in your 20s, and I used to have like 3 jobs, and like I worked from sun up to sundown, and then pop back up the next day, and then and now it's like, you know what? It's 5 o'clock. I have to go home.
Yes. Our energy is not the same as we approach 40. I was the same way, working multiple jobs in my 20s, working at odd hours too. I'm like, nope, I need to be in bed by this time. I need to be logged onto a computer at this time, and I need to be closing my laptop at this time. So those boundaries have become very clear as I've, grown older.
Absolutely. It's amazing. You look back and you're like, I can't believe I did that, or I let them do that, or what.
Yes.
But you know what? It's all experience, so we got to be
Absolutely
grateful for that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, Dr. Ciera, we talked about so many Ciera Graham-Graves. I'm going to give you all your credit.
Yeah.
But yes, we talked about so many different things, and what I'd like you to do, because you have so much to give to people, tell people how they can reach you.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can reach me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, and, I do respond to messages that are sent to me. So Dr. Ciera Graham-Graves is my LinkedIn name, so feel free to reach out to me there. My website is cieragraham.com, and then I also have an Instagram, Dr. C. Graham Consulting. So would love to connect with all of the listeners, and, for those of you who are familiar with some of my articles, or you've read my articles before, I'm always so just inspired by people, who have read them and want to say something. So even if your message is, hey, I read this article and I really love it, I love hearing that. So excited to connect.
Absolutely, y'all. Go check out Career Contessa as well. Like she mentioned, Dr. Graham-Graves has so many articles there, and I've read several of them, and I'm like, yes, how do you know me? Did we have a conversation? And
Yes.
it's very therapeutic, like she mentioned. So make sure y'all follow her. And again, Good Gossip is so grateful, Dr. Ciera Graham-Graves, that
Thank
you
you.
sat down with us and had this conversation because it needed to be had. And 2025 is the year of we're not messing around with who we show up as. No,
Yes.
anymore. That's it.
Yes.
Put a fork in it.
Yes, yes. Put a fork in it. All right. This has been great. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you.
Blam, so good gossip. One conversation open up understanding and empowerment.
Yeah. Hey, yo, guess what he is up on? Black woman empowerment.